And we're live. Welcome to the Writer's Life. Take two. Welcome to the Writer's Life, place where you get the sight, sound, smells, taste of my particular writer's life, and where you get Charlie Salzberg, New York City writer. I have to bow down to this man. He is just Charlie's like the type of writer you would have read about in the About Town section of what would it have been, New York Magazine or something like that, you know, rubbing elbows with Truman Capote and Norman Mailer, who I'm sure you've met and all that stuff back in the day when you were.
No, but I've got a funny story about Mailer.
What is it?
I went to a party. I'm not even sure what it was for. It was at the Hard Rock Cafe, and
Right.
Mailer was there, and I'm much too shy to go up to him and say anything. But I saw him, and I saw him start to go up the stairs to the second floor, and I rushed over, and I got right behind him and walked up behind him so I could say that I walked in the steps of Norman Mailer. But that's as close as I got.
Oh my God. Speaking of stories about Norman Mailer, Charlie and I are in this anthology together called True Pulp, and it comes out in August. And there'll be a link at the bottom here, not only for Charlie, but for the Kickstarter that we're running for this. And it's already 200% funded, so it's going great. You got 3 weeks left to grab some unbelievable stuff. But John Hemingway, Ernest Hemingway's grandson, is also in the anthology, and he's got a funny story about Norman Mailer. He and his father, Gregory, Ernest's son Gregory, was friends with Norman Mailer, and he took Norman fishing, and John Hemingway went with them. He was about 12 years old at the time or whatever, and Norman, you know, like, who was supposed to be sort of a tough guy, right? Kind of a little tough guy. Barfed his whole way through the whole thing, and he kept saying to Greg, like, when are we going in? When are we gonna go in? And Greg Hemingway was like, when after we catch something, so stop bitching, you know, or whatever. So anyway, just kind of a funny story because you know, the seasickness will level anyone, you know. So anyway. But Charlie just got back from London. What were you doing there, man?
I was asked to teach at a writer's workshop over there.
Right.
So it was 11 days. That's the longest
cool.
I've been away from New York City since a year in Boston for law school. And that was a while ago.
That's the 60s, because I've read your bio.
Yeah. And so it was, I was homesick by the third day. I was ready to go back.
Right. You amaze me. What part of New York do you live in?
I live on the Upper West Side, and I grew up on the Upper East Side.
Wow. So you're like one of the last. Like, I couldn't I'm a full-time writer, but I couldn't, if I moved to New York City, I'd blow through all my money in a month, you know, like, or 2 months. You know what I mean?
Well, you know, my subsidy through my early years was having a rent stabilized apartment that was incredibly cheap. And if someone said, let's go to dinner and a movie, I'd say I can do one of the two, and the movie is better because it's cheaper than dinner. But that apartment was a walk up on Sutton Place, of all places, which is a snazzy neighborhood.
Yeah.
That kept me going for most of those early years, and there were a lot of them.
Right. So you've been writing professionally for how long? I mean, I know you wrote for newspapers, magazines.
Yeah. Well, I got to tell you, Vince, everything in my career has been an accident, and been a function of never saying no. And so I quit law school after a year, did a little teaching in the New York City system, and then I got a job in the mailroom at New York Magazine.
Right.
And it was the heyday of when Clay Felker owned it. And for those of you who don't know, Clay really invented the city magazine. There were no city magazines now. Every big city has one now. And he started New York, and the word was that if you start in the mailroom, he moves you up really quickly to an editorship. And so I thought, a friend of mine said, oh, you're an English major, you like to read, maybe you should be an editor. So I bought that story, and in my young mind, it was, yeah, I'll be there a few weeks, and then I'll be an editor.
Right.
But I saw in those days the Office. Clay came from newspapers. He was a newspaper guy, and so the Office was one big open room, a giant open room, no cubicles, nothing, just desks. And in order to get quicker from the elevators to the main room, you'd go through the mailroom. So all these great writers, Tom Wolfe and Pete Hamill and Gay Talese and John Simon, they would come through the mailroom, and they got a big kick out of in the mailroom. Here I was, a college graduate, and the other guy in the mailroom was a laid off college PhD professor. So there were all these educated guys in the mail. And but the thing was, after a few days, I saw the writers would sort of wander in around 10:30, and they'd smoke cigarettes and drink coffee and talk to the editors and talk on the phone, and then they'd leave at 12. And around 2:30, you would get the aroma of alcohol coming in through because they'd been at lunch, and they'd come in and they'd talk to the editors, and they'd smoke cigarettes and drink coffee, and they'd leave at 4. And I'd say, that's the job I want. I don't want to be an editor. They were there on closing nights. Yeah, closing nights, they were there till midnight.
Right.
So that's why I had no training as a journalist. Never written a nonfiction piece. I always just wanted to write fiction. But I gave it a try, and I thought, I don't have to go out when it's bad weather. I don't have to dress up. This is really the job I want to do. So that's how I got into writing, actually making some money.
Wow. When did you sell your first short story?
God, I'm not a big short story writer, so I'm trying to think. It was probably in the 70s or 80s. But before that, I did a magazine cover story for the New York Daily News, the Sunday magazine. And it was on these 3-card Monte players that were all over New York City. All
over the city, yep.
Yeah. And I had an agent then. I thought she was a Philistine, and she thought I was a fool. And so she saw this article, and she said, I think it would make a great novel. And I said, I don't see that. I don't want to do it as a novel. And she said, oh, yeah. I said, no, forget it, Barbara. I don't want to do it. And a week later, she called me up, and she said, I had lunch with an editor at Grosset and Dunlop, and they'd love to see a proposal for that story. And I had told her I don't want to do it. So I whipped off something. And in those days, the only way you copied stuff is either you go out or you use carbon paper.
Right.
And I didn't want the job. I didn't think I'd get it. I came up with what I thought was an okay storyline, but I didn't put much into it. And I gave it to her. And a week later, she calls up and says, I sold it. They want to give you $5,000 to write this.
Great.
And that was a lot of money. For rent, just so you know, my rent was maybe $300. So, and it was winter, and I thought, I'll just whip something off. And so, but I couldn't find the page or two summary that I sent to them. I thought I threw, because I didn't save it, and it wasn't on a computer because there were no computers.
Right.
So I found it in the trash. Fortunately, I did not throw trash out all that often.
Right.
And I wrote the book, and I said to them, I'll write this thing, but I don't want my name on it because, I don't want my first novel to be this crappy little thing.
Right.
So they said, okay. So I handed it in, and they liked it. And about, I don't know, at some point I get a thing in the mail from them, and it's a mock-up of the cover, and it's got my name on it. So I called up the editor, and I said, remember I told you I wanted to use another name? She said, oh, yeah, I forgot. I said, well, here's the name. She said, well, we've printed all these covers already.
Can't do it now. Yeah.
Yeah. So unless you want to pay for a new cover, we're not going to do it. So that book wound up being published. And so that was really my first fiction published before short story. I think a couple of short stories afterwards.
Wow. Fantastic. So tell me, I got my first deal in 90. I mean, I signed the contract in 98. or no, I got the letter of intent in like October '98, signed it in January '99. So that's how long I've been into it. And I've seen the difference between then and 2025 is just tremendous. You're a little bit older than me, like, you know, so you remember the '70s and the '80s and all that sort of stuff. Like how I look back on like your period and I find it very romantic, you know, like, you know, you're beating the story out on the typewriter in front of the window, and you got the, you know, the cop cars going by and the horns beeping, and you're going downstairs for like a coffee and an egg sandwich and then coming back up. You know, like I love that stuff, right? And steam coming out.
I was sick that day. That didn't happen to me. I mean, other stuff happened, but yeah, it is the romantic notion of that.
Right. So how in your mind, how has it changed? Or is it really sort of the same, only with new toys?
A little bit of both. I was in I helped form a writers group back then. And there were about 12 of us. It was a pretty big writers group. And we were all, I don't think any of us were published. Some I hadn't been. And one of the people had maybe written some magazine articles. And we jokingly called ourselves the Famous Writers Group, because none of us were famous. And we'd meet every 2 weeks down we'd meet at people's apartments, but most of the people lived downtown. So they lived in Soho or Tribeca.
Right, that makes sense.
We'd meet and every couple of weeks, and the person, you know, we'd chip in for some wine and cheese.
Right.
Now, a couple of those people have passed away, but now I think everyone in that group has been published. Not necessarily famously, but everyone did. And so that was a really fun time, hanging out with those people and, you know, just kind of talking about writing.
Right.
And so that was a fun period, but it's always been tough for certain kind of writers. I mean, I was not a crime writer then. I became a crime writer totally accidentally. But so I was more of like, I want to write the great American novel kind of writer. Yeah. And they used to call it mid-list, which is another way of saying literature that doesn't really sell very well. And so it was always tough. The difference is that you could get rejected by 25 houses because there were all these different publishers. Now, as you know, they're all conglomerates. So you sort of you get 5 rejections because there are only 5 major publishers. And the other big difference is there are many, many more independent publishers, like the ones we have published with, which is a plus. I mean, you don't make much money, but good stuff can get published. So in a way, I think it's a better time for quality work that's getting published than back then, because there were fewer books. And one of the other things that I did is I used to write a lot of book reviews for the New York Times, and I would get a book and it would fiction. They gave me fiction and nonfiction, and I'd get a novel and I'd read it and I said to myself, what editor ever thought this was good enough to publish? And yet it got published.
Yes.
So there's always been kind of crappy stuff published, and there's always been good stuff that doesn't get published. You know, and who knows why? And you know, so there's no formula for, you know, it wasn't easier back then. It's not easy now, that's for sure. The other difference, I think, is that now they pay much more attention to the numbers of your last books. I had an agent say to me, an agent friend, he was not my agent. He said, you know, when I call up an editor to pitch a book and I give the name of the author, I can practically hear them on the computer checking out Bookspan to see how many copies the last book sold. And as you know, Vince, we don't have any control on how many we sell, especially if you're with a smaller publisher. So suddenly you've got this monkey on your back of trying to make numbers, having nothing to do with quality at all. And I think maybe that's a little bit, because it's easier to get numbers now, it may be that's a more prevalent now. I think I lost you, Vin. Alexa, alarm off. Ah, there you are.
Yeah. What? You know what? We haven't had like a crime surge. We haven't had a power surge.
Blame it on me.
I do. I blame it on you because you're
Absolutely.
the great. It is. You are the great one. Domine. So, folks, this thing's going to come to you in two parts. There's going to be part one, which we just got zapped off of, and this is the beginning of part two. Charles, you were
so we get to do it better this time.
We do, and also you're on the other side this time. So
right.
I don't know what that was. Yeah. So we were talking about the differences between publishing back then and publishing now, and how there used to be 1 million houses back then. Even when I started in '98, there was something like 35 houses or 40, and now we're down to about 5. But there are all these small presses. Like Charlie and I publish a lot with. I'm not trying to push my book because this is Charlie's day, but Charlie and I published with this publisher called Down and Out, and who has an amazing stable.
Mm-hmm,
which has they've got you, they've got Eric Beatner, they have like a bunch of Edgar Award winners. I mean, Seamus Award nominees and winners, and Thriller Award nominees and winners, and it's funny because like none of us are making a ton of money from it, but there is a niche audience that absolutely loves this kind of work. And so it's almost like, I almost feel like the difference between now and back when I first published, probably when you first published also, is like there's these little tribes now. There's these little tribes, and it's like Charlie, you have your little tribe of maybe 2 or 3 or 4 or 10,000 people. I have no idea. Readers, I have no idea. And I have my little tribe, and I send them notices, about the new book or a new story or whatever, and it sells, and however many copies, and doesn't really matter if I do it through my Bear Media company or it's Down and Out, or if it's Ocean View or Thomas and Mercer or whatever. It just doesn't matter. They're like, all right, he's got new material, I want to read it. And then every now and then, or every year, you get a certain amount of new readers, and maybe 1 or 2 will fall off. So that's like the new era. It's kind of like you make your own show, I think.
Absolutely. Well, that's another big difference. Is back then, you wrote the book, you edited it, and then your responsibility was over. There was no social media. You weren't expected to have what they call the word that writers hate, especially nonfiction platforms. You didn't do any of that stuff. You were a writer. You wrote, and if they told you to be someplace, fine. But it was, and now most of the work I find is done after I finish the book. Right. Because you have to keep your name out there. So you have to write essays for blogs, or you have to, and so that's there was no inkling of that back in the 70s and 80s, and I don't know the 90s. What was it like? Because I don't remember the specific.
It was still
when you started.
Yep, I went to writing school. You had to go to writing school because I went to Vermont College from 95 through 97. It was full time. And why did I do that? I didn't really want to do it, but I did. I'm glad I did it because I met some great people. Like I was Les Egerton and stuff like that. But I did it because the best I could hope for was to land a teaching gig and publish a couple of books a year. In fact, that was the prize. Like if you got a teaching gig, teaching creative writing, holy moly, you made it, man. And then you'll publish a book maybe every year or every couple of years, and a few short stories. That was the life,
right?
And that's what I was hoping for. By pure happenstance, by being in the right place at the right time, I was able to take my creative thesis, make it in. I pulled out every edit that my final advisor suggested and went with my initial gut and put it all back in, and finished it like in a few months, and found this agent, Jimmy Vines. And,
I remember
Jimmy. Yeah, and he sold it like in a month, and for a lot of money, and so I never had to teach or anything like that. I was full time from that point on, but I was a freelance writer too. So folks don't think I've just been writing fiction all this time. I've written plenty of blogs for money. I've written plenty of articles and whatever. But so that it was in the 90s. It was still everything was paper. You threw stuff in an envelope with an SASE and sent it out to the magazines. And I still got some.
I never ever put a self-addressed stamped envelope.
These are the magazines, like you publish in.
Those, I never included a self-addressed stamped envelope because I knew that if they were interested, they were going to call me, and I'd be damned if I was going to pay for them to send me a rejection. So, it's just. But you're right. Things were done because there was no email. You had the expense of copying a 300-page manuscript. Right. And if you sent it to more than one place, and then you had to get it there, so you either delivered it yourself or it was a much different situation.
Right. There was no internet, so you had to do and it was the waiting. You guys, anybody who's watching this, who's under 40, say, certainly under 35, you have no idea the anxiety that like Charlie and I have experienced in life, because waiting for that letter or waiting for your agent to comment on your novel, or once the agent likes it and sends it out, like waiting for the answer on that novel. And I think what comes to mind is that movie Sideways. They actually get it right in that movie when who's the main character? I forget his name. But he's a writer, and he's waiting for his agent to call him with an acceptance, and he just keeps calling her, and you're like, oh, she's busy right now, sir. Like, and he finally calls her, and she's like, sorry, I just, what, the market's really tough right now, and they're just not taking that kind of material, and he gets all pissed off and walks into the winery and like just downs, like the spit jar, that's getting it right.
That's right, and I've got a story about that, about just what you're talking about, waiting for stuff. I lived on the 4th floor, and I'd come down every so often to look at the mail, because that's where the news came from.
Right.
You'd get a letter or you'd get whatever. So I go down one day, and the mailman is there putting the mail in the slots, and he says to me, sees which one I open, so he knows who I am. He says, you're a writer, aren't you? And I said, yeah. And I'm wondering, how the hell does he know I'm a writer? And then I realized, sure, he delivers all my rejections. He can see.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
Yep.
So it says, my son wants to be a writer. He's in parochial school. I think he was a junior or something. He said, and he wrote this short story, and his teacher liked it so much that she sent it to Stephen King.
Oh my God.
I said, oh, I really? He said, yeah. And a few, maybe it was weeks or days, they got a call from Stephen King. And King had read the story and said to this mailman, I will pay for your son's college education. All you have to pay for is the books.
Wow.
Now, and that's you won't find that story anywhere.
Never heard it.
Right, because he didn't. The thing that I really liked about it is he didn't publicize it. He just did it. And the only reason I knew is because the mailman told me, and it was his son. But everything. There were two things. First, it was the mail, and then it was the best thing that ever happened, or the worst, was answering machines, because at least you could get messages. Otherwise, before that, if an agent happened to call you and you're not home, they have to keep calling back. So it was a whole other world.
Right. And then when the internet came along, it was just so easy to bother your agent. Like, how's it going? And what they tried again, for newbies out there or whoever, again, like, never contact your agent. Your agent will contact you if there's news. It just, all it does is annoy them. And it took me a long time to learn that, because I'm really impatient, Charlie, extremely impatient. How I ever survived in this business, I'll never know. It cost me a couple wives and all that stuff, but because I have no patience for anything. Like, you should see me at an airport. Like, what do you mean we're delayed 10 minutes? What do you mean there's like one of the wheels is like not take off anyway? Like, we'll be fine.
Right.
I just want to get there, and that's the way it is. That's my mantra for writing too. I just want to get there. I love the writing process. The writing process is completely different. When I'm in my zen, my writing process, that's just completely different. Time has no meaning. But when the business end of it, the business end of it is a pain in the ass.
Absolutely.
And
we're not prepared for it. We're not businessmen. I mean, most of us.
No, we're not.
Don't want to be, and we don't want to.
No. I know so many writers now who have, like Scott Nicholson, for instance, who really made it big, in the early Kindle days and all that. And he's like retired now. He's like, I'm not buying ads, for my books, and I'm not doing any of that. And you got to pull it out of draft to digital. I'm talking about indie publishing now. You got to pull it out of draft to or you got to put it into draft to digital and get like a book bub and all that sort of stuff. Like, but to be honest, I spend my days now. My creative hours are in the morning. I'll have maybe one writing sprint in the afternoon, but the rest of those hours in the afternoon, to be honest, all business. It's running a writing business. Not, I don't mind it if I want to skip it for the day or whatever. No one's gonna like fire me. But you know, what you give is what you get, of course. But it's not as romantic as I thought, Charlie.
No, no, it was never as romantic as we thought it might be.
Right.
You know, it just. But I don't know about you. It's the only thing I can do. I mean, my one skill, other than I was a fairly good athlete, is typing.
Right.
That's my one skill. So, and it scares me now. If I were 22 now, I don't know how I'd make a living, because
I don't know.
ChatGPT. You know, I made when I was writing nonfiction, I'd make money doing the annual report for the YMCA or the whatever it was. Yeah. Now, they don't need me or anyone like me. That can be done so easily by ChatGPT.
It certainly can be. And yeah. I've told this story before, but I always try to have like a freelance gig, nonfiction gig on the side. But the rule is it can't take more than an hour a day, and it can't suck the life out of me. But it's also got to pay. And so for the past 5 years, I think, I've been working for this influencer and ghostwriting articles for professionals in their field, for everything from like the Jerusalem Post to a really popular mommy blog. You know, their name goes on it, right? Whatever. And so like, I'm like, dude, you know, my boss was in LA and I'm like, you haven't been sending me a whole lot of work. And he's like, Vin, I'm sorry, but I'm using AI. I was like, so there, it happened. Right. I was replaced with AI, and I swear to God, if your grandkids want to get into this gig, make sure they're at least doing something else as well.
Absolutely. But yeah. It's the anyone who has a really romantic view of writers, no matter when. But you reminded me, when I was a magazine journalist, I was doing articles to make a living life. Yeah, I was interviewing Meg Ryan and Lonnie Anderson, but I was also doing an article where I had to call up like 30 electronic dealers across the country and ask them what their hottest selling item was. That's not writing, I mean, that's, but I would get paid for it. So
but that's the gig.
I did a lot of gigs like you did just for the money. And the other thing is I was not, it turned out I was okay as a journalist, but I was very shy. And how I thought I could actually talk to strangers, I don't know. But when you have to do something, you have to do it.
Right. It's funny you say that, because just like you, my goal was to be a fiction writer, and that was it. But I had plenty of journalism gigs. And my first relatively major one was for Hudson Valley Magazine. And I was supposed to go around all these not Airbnbs, but they didn't have it back then, but bed and breakfasts that were in the Hudson Valley, located in the Hudson Valley, interview the owners, all that, the stuff you would have to do. But me being kind of, like I said, impatient, lazy, and just, I just wasn't like the gregarious kind of like, I got to do my interview, be prepared for it. And I just like took a ride down the Hudson Valley and like took a couple pictures and split, and then just sort of wrote a fiction. And I'll never forget it. The editor was like, "This is horseshit. Like, what is this? Like," and I was like, "Oh yeah, it's like." And she's like, "I got to have somebody else write it." And like, I was like, "Oh," I was mortified. I was like 29.
Right.
And like, but I learned a lesson also at the same time. But I knew then that being a reporter was not going to be for me. I could write a journalism piece or whatever, but I ended up writing trade journalism because I was trained in the construction industry, and that was easy for me.
Very common. When I was teaching up at Syracuse at the journalism school, Newhouse, a lot of those kids were really talented. The first jobs they could get were writing for a financial magazine or writing for a trade magazine like you're talking about, which they knew nothing about, but that they were employing writers. They all wanted to, work for the New York Times or or Esquire, but the jobs were never really there in large numbers.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm much more comfortable, probably like you, much more comfortable thinking up my crazy thoughts and just writing into the dark and like seeing how it comes out. And if that's what you're good at, that's what you're good at. And thank God we're good at it, because you know how many of those people in those cubicles who are having to make all those calls and all that shit, wish they were doing what we're doing. Almost all of them, right?
Right.
The old adage used to be like every journalist or reporter has a manuscript in her desk under, like in their drawer or whatever. That's probably still true today. So Charlie, what are you working on now? What was your latest book for Down?
Well, I just finished a book. The latest one that was out was Man on the Run.
Yeah, Man on the Run.
Yeah, I just finished one that's just getting ready to be circulated now. And it's a standalone. It's called The Beginning of Everything.
Oh, cool.
And so we'll see what happens. And then I don't know if that, I know this is true of you, Vin, because you're always working. I mean, you are not only the hardest working, but you write a lot of, you must write pretty fast.
Yeah, pretty fast.
But if I don't start something right after I finish something, I don't know who I am. You know,
I hear you.
Know what I mean, right? I am a writer, and if I'm not writing, so I force myself. I'm not one of those who waits to see where the other one's going to land and when it's going to come out. If I have an idea, I'll just sit down and start it. So that's where I am now. I've just started something.
Yep. And just to add to what Charlie's saying, like, this past couple of months, I think I wrote 2 novels and 4 short stories, and I keep putting them aside. I finish them, I put them aside, but I don't go over them again. I don't finish them again precisely because what Charlie just said. If I'm not writing new stuff, I feel like out of whack. And it's almost like I don't exercise or something like that. And like today was one of those days. I'm like, I have to finish the new Chase Baker. I got to go over it. I've got to do it. Got to run through Grammarly. I've got to do it. And so today I didn't write new words, and I feel kind of like I didn't use my biologic this morning. You know what I mean? I just don't feel right, Charlie. Right. And it's going to be like that all weekend. So I just got to prep myself for it. Yeah, it's a mindset thing. It's like, weird.
See, I can get away, but I don't write every day. It's embarrassing how little I write. I'm a very fast typist, 90 words a minute. And I can focus once I sit down, I can focus. But I still have to have something in my head and know that I'm writing something. I know that I'm working on. I know that I can sit down at the computer and there's not there's a blank page, but there's words before it. And, every so often someone will say, "Oh, when would you ever retire?" And I'd say, "Well, no, because that's how unfortunately, it's not a good thing. That's how I define myself. And so if I stop writing, what am I? And so plus I still enjoy it.
Right. Well, we're getting towards the end here, but you'll laugh at this. I actually, now that I'm 60, I'll be 61 in less than a week, right? Mm-hmm. And so I have a decent Social Security payment coming, right? So my accountant is like, you're never going to retire as a writer, because it's what you do, and you do it, whatever, no matter what. And so she's like, take early Social Security, and great. And so I asked Chat GPT yesterday. I'm like, set me up with here's what I make monthly from royalties. Here's what I make quarterly on average. And this is the amount of books, and it already knows how many books I have and all that shit.
Right.
And it's like, oh, excellent, Vincent. Your accountant is right on. This is a great plan for you. This is how much between your royalties, projected royalties, and your social, this is what you'll be making per week on average. And it's only going to, would you like me to draw you a line chart? And I'm like, yeah, please. So it had my whole future for the next 10 years, lined up or graphed out. And I was like, this is amazing. And so I was like, oh my God. And it said specifically, next year, consider yourself semi-retired in that you won't be dependent on the grind. and I think what that meant was like I probably won't have to freelance anymore or something like that. But while still doing what you love to do, you know what I mean?
Right.
And so I was like, holy crap, like there's just, so I guess what I'm getting at, we began this conversation in part one with like the difference between the old days and now. And in some ways, I think I'd rather be a writer now just because there's so many tools out there and there are a lot of publishing opportunities. It's just that the money isn't quite there like it used to be. Like when you got a book deal in the 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s, even early 2000s, you got a book deal.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you got six figures, because probably you'd get at least one or two major deals or three, and if before something struck or whatever. But now, no, now if like you get $5,000 up front or something, that's a lot.
Sometimes less, sometimes nothing.
Yeah, sometimes nothing now. Yeah, you're just getting whatever.
I'm just glad that I don't have to make my living through writing anymore.
Right.
Because it would be impossible, especially living in New York City. We talked about before. Yeah. There's no way.
Yeah. But I'm proud of you and I'm so proud to be a friend because again, like I say, I still find this a romantic gig, and I find successful guys like you who have worked with so many huge people. And again, Charlie's email or Charlie's website will be below here. Like you represent that New York City writers guard. You're putting your collar up against the cold Hudson River.
I won't disabuse you of that notion, Vince. I'll let it go.
Or actually, in your case, you put on your baseball hat and your jean jacket or whatever, and you meet Reed Coleman for coffee.
That's right.
That's awesome, Charlie. It's been a pleasure, and everybody look forward to reading Charlie's story in True Pulp coming up. And
I'm really looking forward to that because there's some really good people in it.
Yes.
That I'm anxious to read.
Yeah, it's going to be cool. I'm really looking forward to it. We went through we were going to originally take it to a publisher, and we were all set to go with the publisher, and then Troy and I looked at each other and we're like, why don't we do this through one of our own imprints because it'll be more money for everybody, to be perfectly honest, and it'll be just as good, if not a better product, and it'll be just as available and distributed as anything else. So we thought, there's something that's different too. There's something that's new, a new opportunity. All right, Charlie, man. Thank you so much. And I will be talking to you soon.
Thanks for having me, man.
Oh, I loved it. I got to have it back on soon. All right, brother.
All right, take care.